Troubled teen institutions is a billion-dollar industry, but it has a death toll of nearly 400 teenagers. With statistics like these, it's difficult to tell if the risk is really worth the reward. And what's even more problematic is that the parents who are so desperate to help their children don't always know the full story. So today, we're going to try to share the full story. How did this industry grow into what it is today? And who is the person or people at the top of this greedy chain of destruction, pain, and even death? Today, we are diving into the troubled teen industry and the history of it as a whole. So sit back, take a deep breath, because it's time to let the fresh air in. Hi, everyone. I hope you are having a wonderful day. Welcome back, or welcome if you're new. My name is Erin, and I am fascinated by all things cults, true crime, and unique spiritual practices. With my content, I hope to understand the inner workings of problematic groups and people and share survivors' stories so that we can hopefully help people to avoid these dangerous groups and people. If you like this sort of thing, I would absolutely love to have you here, so please consider subscribing to this channel. Before we jump in today, I want to make this disclaimer. We're going to be talking a lot about the experiences of children and teens in these institutions. There are a number of that I will be detailing, as well as talking about deaths, so it could be very disturbing for some viewers. So please take care of yourself and use discretion. My sources for this video will be found in the pinned comment down below. So if you want to look more into this, please go ahead and do so, because there is so much to cover. I might even make this another series on my channel, because the deeper I got into this topic, the more shocked I was to see how huge this issue is. It's not just a few wilderness camps or a few of these schools. There are hundreds all over the country, and they are preying on desperate parents and the children that they care so much about. So I want to say thank you to all the people who have already been on the forefront of uncovering this information for literally decades. Recently, I made a video exposing the shocking things that happen inside troubled teen institutions. After watching the program on Netflix and seeing all of the cult like tactics that were being used, I knew it was something that I had to talk more about. And just like all cults, there is always a money grab. And that money is usually gained by pretending to offer something good, but actually, the followers, or in this case, children, are being psychologically and physically. So today we are going to go down a rabbit hole to how these places even came to be. But if you haven't seen my previous video on the topic, I highly recommend you watch it here. As a basic introduction or review into what we're talking about, a troubled teen institution is basically like a boarding school that parents send their children to in order to correct bad behavior. It's bad behavior that they might be exhibiting at home, getting involved in drugs, alcohol, misbehavior at school, or honestly, some parents even send their kids for a basic teen attitude adjustment. It's sold to parents as this solution, but once the children are there, they're literally cut off from their parents and end up enduring what can only be described as torture. Meanwhile, the parents are spending $3,000 to $5,000 a month to have their kid in this place. And it's absolutely despicable that these places even exist. But how? Whose disgusting idea was it to basically have parents pay to send their kids to prison? Well, worse than prison, because some teens say that they would have welcomed prison as an alternative. Well, I was shocked to learn that the troubled teen industry has literally been around for over 100 years, with the first institution being opened in 1912. Helen T. Devereaux started the first school for exceptional children in her home that year. According to sources that applaud her work, she became interested in teaching people with learning disabilities and believed that they were being underserved in public schools. The Devereaux schools started to expand all through Philadelphia as a private organization, but then it transitioned into a nonprofit called the Devereaux Foundation as it expanded further across multiple states. There are now 13 states that have a Devereaux school. Helen Devereaux is celebrated in some communities for her focus on children with learning challenges. However, survivors share that they experienced abuse and trauma, and in fact, the first death inside a troubled teen institution was actually reported to have been at a Devereaux school in Texas in the 1930s. So, whether Helen had good intentions or not, her idea sparked the wide issue we now see today. In fact, in 2020, allegations came out that a teenage boy with autism had been by a staff member within the facility. In fact, after the Philadelphia Inquirer conducted an investigation into Devereaux schools, they found that 41 children had experienced similar trauma by staff members. And what makes this even more insidious is this was a government funded organization. In 2019, the U.S. Office of Refugee Resettlement awarded the Devereaux Foundation $40.2 million to house children who had been separated from their parents at the border. Can you even imagine? You're already enduring the trauma of being alone and isolated in a new country without your parents, and you have no idea where you are or where your parents are. Then you're just thrown into one of these establishments. It's absolutely heartbreaking. And what's even more gross about this is that Devereaux brings in around $467 million a year in revenue and can't even afford qualified staff. It is full of underqualified staff and it's understaffed at that. This foundation claims that they're trying to heal trauma in children that these children got from experiencing dangerous and scary circumstances. But it sounds like it just makes everything a lot worse. One teen girl went to try to heal herself from an experience of being instead, she was twice by a staff member in the institution. I just don't understand how people think that this is okay. These kids are looking for help and support, and instead they're just getting more trauma. It is incredibly heartbreaking. How dare anyone within these institutions try to take advantage of people who are so vulnerable to be victims of or have some kind of mental disability? It's disgusting to me. And when asked about these instances and allegations, the senior vice president kind of just excused herself by saying, well, it's not just happening in Devereaux schools, it's happening all over the industry, and we're doing our best to prevent it from happening. Like, come on, give me a break. It shouldn't be happening at all. That admission alone should shut down all of these places. It should not be happening at all, let alone repeatedly across multiple institutions. At some point, you have to ask, why is this happening within my organization? I must be doing something wrong and definitely hiring the wrong people. It's despicable. And this has been happening in Devereaux schools for years. So one can only imagine that it gets worse from here. Another school that was created over 100 years ago but is still around today is the Sonia Shankman Orthogenic School. It originally was meant to be a school that specialized in learning about children and their development, especially as it pertained to children with intellectual challenges. It actually started as a collaboration with Rush Medical College and the University of Chicago. However, as leadership changed, so did the philosophy of the organization, as well as how they treated the children. And I want to mention this right here that very conveniently, if you go to the Sonia Shankman Orthogenic School website, they barely talk about this individual's tenure. They just gloss right over it. And he ran the place for 30 years. Bruno Bettelheim was truly a con artist. He managed to get everyone to believe that he had a PhD in psychology, but he actually had no credentials in psychology. He had a bunch of theories on how to help autistic children, but that's about it. And the thing is, his teachings and ideas were incredibly controversial for the entirety of his tenure at the organization. He really liked to use corporal punishment as a modality to help the children who have autism. How he fell into this role and kept it for 30 years is a mystery to us, but people who have studied this situation have speculated that he was counting on World War II to distract anyone from ensuring that he had any credentials because he took over around 1944. Unfortunately for all of those children, he was right. And I just think that it's really fishy that the school tries to hide that dark part of their past. I'd have a little more respect if they were more transparent about, hey, we do have this kind of dark history, but that was, he left 50 years ago, and we're taking a lot of steps to ensure that we hire the best people. But I guess I'm also not very surprised at all because this school operates a lot like Ivy Ridge, the school that was featured in the program on Netflix. You have to earn different levels of privileges, and the students get involved in work programs, which just kind of sounds a lot to me like free child labor. It just seems like with these schools, maybe they start out with good intentions, but once leadership gets into the wrong hands, it changes the school for the worst forever. The culture has been completely reshaped. Now, between the early 1900s and the 1940s, several schools opened, and from those schools, more expanded all across the country. There are similar themes in all of these schools, from using corporal punishment as a way to teach children to the children, and there's even been several deaths due to negligence of either the facility itself or those running it. And since there isn't really enough time to cover every single one of these schools in this video, I mean, there's literally hundreds at this point, I'm going to go ahead and jump to the year 1946 when the first wilderness camp was created. Camp Woodland Springs was run by Campbell Loutmiller. He and his wife were conservationists, but they didn't hold any credentials that would warrant them appropriate people to be running a therapy camp for children. But this man would be running a camp, whose first group of children consisted of 56 maladjusted boys. And the ages of these boys ranged between 7 and 15 years old. 7. I mean, can you imagine? At 7 years old, you're misbehaving somehow and you're sent off to a wilderness camp by yourself. These kids were suggested to go to these places either by schools or the Times equivalent to a social agency. And only 5% of these boys went voluntarily. I mean, can you really voluntarily go somewhere when you're underage? I don't think so. This camp was situated on 200 acres of land, so it's quite vast and would no doubt be challenging to escape from if one even wanted to try and risk it. There were a few buildings on the property, but these were mostly to house the staff or serve as a meeting place for the campers. But as far as where the children stayed, well, they had to build their own shelters outside. So even those 7-year-olds had to create and upkeep their own shelter. And they also had to cook half their own meals. And look, I totally understand why having some basic survival skills are great. I mean, I grew up with a mother who's from way up upper Michigan in the middle of the woods where she might bump into a bear walking home from school. So I grew up camping and hiking and learning certain skills. And it was fun to learn how to pitch a tent and build a fire. There are still skills I would love to learn more about to this day. I find them valuable. But the difference is that it's my choice. I'm interested in it. I'm not a child being forced to face the outside elements in some random place in Texas just to try to survive. And what's worse, some of the activities on this camp were going on hundreds of miles long river cruises. Yeah. Imagine being a child and trying to converse down a river into the Gulf of Mexico. It's just like difficult to even fathom or really think about. It's all labor and it's abuse. And if you're familiar with the group Synanon, it's a rehab program that was created in 1958, you may have heard of the game, which is kind of a attack therapy used to force people to take accountability, where basically one person would be at the center and all the participants would be screaming and yelling abuse their way until that person gave in and admitted their wrongdoing or whatever they're accused of doing. Well, allegedly, this was also a tactic that was used at Camp Woodland Springs. So there've been a lot of docu-series and resources that I've used in the past that reference Synanon being one of the first places that utilize this kind of attack therapy, but apparently it goes back as far as the 1940s. And fun but semi-random fact, one of the survivors of Synanon actually thought the term brainwashing was positive because Synanon told him that it meant that he was washing his brain of all the bad stuff. And I just always think of that whenever I use the term. I'm like, the term brainwashing itself is a word that's used to brainwash. It's just such a mind F, if you know what I'm saying. Additionally, at Camp Woodland Springs, the children weren't in actual school. No, instead, they taught themselves their education through self directed activities. Doesn't sound like they were really going to learn a lot of new things that are useful in the outside modern world. I mean, if the purpose of these wilderness programs is to help children who are described as being maladjusted or who just don't seem to thrive in a school like setting, how are they setting these children up for success in a real modern world? Are these students going to be prepared for college and life afterwards? It'd just be better if they gave them a rundown of adulthood, like, hey, rent is pricey, food is expensive, here's how to pay your taxes. Oh, the doctor ain't cheap, kid. Get a job and get ready to live with four roommates well into your 30s. Okay, I might be projecting here. Much like the schools we've previously discussed, these wilderness camps expanded all across the country, getting more and more extreme as they spread. They've expanded to being these essentially death marches, even forcing kids to hike through the desert with barely any food, water, sun coverage, any of that. And yes, there have been deaths reported. It is just absolutely heartbreaking. One thing I've been noticing about these schools is they're often created or run by people that have absolutely no credentials to prove that they know how to help these children. It's literally just a money making scheme. For example, Joe Gald founded the Hyde School in 1966. It was considered to be a behavior modification program. So, what credentials did Gald have to modify children's behavior? Well, he was a teacher who also studied math. So the answer is absolutely none. No credentials. In fact, according to unsilenced.com, they do not employ a single licensed psychologist or therapist, unquote. And not only that, Joe Gald is just an overall problematic person with wildly offensive views. Not only is he racist, but he doesn't believe a woman is a victim of rape if she doesn't fight back. So I can't help but ask, why would you send your child somewhere like this, where the person running the program has this sort of history? If you are going to consider sending your child to a school like this, do not just use the school's website as your resource. Do some more research. Google the school and the history, because the school's website isn't going to tell you, oh, also, we had to report a rape within the school. They're not going to do it. Hyde School also has a history of unreported SA. Since nepotism seems to run rampant at this school, which is still around, by the way, the head of the school is John Gald's daughter, Laura, and his son started running the school after he himself passed away. So they will literally do nothing but try to protect their father's legacy. It's gotten so bad that even in recent years, things that have happened to students when they've brought it up to Laura are basically told to stop talking about it. The students in the audio I'm about to share witnessed a minor being assaulted by an 18-year-old who I believe was also a student. They recorded the incident and tried to show the footage because this wasn't the first time this had happened with this individual. But instead of trying to protect the victim, Laura is more concerned with the perpetrator. Because if this got out that this had happened under her watch, the entire reputation of the school could have been destroyed.
I'm assuming right now that ethics are not an issue. Is that correct?
There was like one issue.
What's that?
Like so last night, like they pulled out his penis and he was slapping on his neck.
Yeah, yesterday or like a few days ago.
I think it was last night. I don't know. I saw the video last night. It was on someone's phone. Like, oh, it's terrible, and it's like it's weird. It's like 14, 18 or 19, and he also was like hugging as he got out of the shower in case he get off. And it's sketchy. It's like really rapey.
Yeah, it's a little weird because he's like he's like blaming it on a concussion or like residue. It's just weird, but
it's like not.
So how, and did you challenge?
No.
Well, he wasn't in the room at the time, but I mean, everyone there was just like, what? Yeah, like
no,
I
would have.
Yeah, me and found out yesterday, like in the lounge, and we were just like, what?
I was very concerned.
Yeah.
Who was with?
I don't know. The video was. Someone was filming, but I don't know.
I went.
Someone was filming. I don't know.
I went in there to get like dryer sheets for my laundry, and like it was. I think. I think so. I don't know. I remember being like kind of like an oddball group of people because they don't usually hang out together.
And have you guys talked to?
No.
No, I don't want to talk to him. I don't want to get touched.
Do you know about this?
No, I mean I heard about it happening, but I didn't know.
He wasn't there when we found out.
Yeah, I.
But I mean, okay, well, I'll look into it.
Cause like, dude already got suspended. Like.
Yeah, he's been doing a lot of like
sketchy.
weird stuff in the dorm.
Very sketchy.
What other weird stuff?
Like the first.
It's like he's just been like messing around.
Like Did you hear about this thing called the rat list?
From what?
It was called the rat list.
Like he's been just like pulling pranks, I guess, in the dorm, like making a mess, like throwing stuff around, or like going into people's rooms and messing their stuff up, or
like
just
like throwing
messing with their
like water bottles down the hall.
Yeah, there was like there was one time when we just got back and me and were getting out of the shower, and he puts like cold water on back and fell down and like his towel came off and like Bar was there actually, and Bar was like, you have to wear like, it was this whole situation, and I had to like get to apologize, but like he's just been doing like stuff like that because he's been like bored, and
he's bored and he is blaming it on the fact that he has a concussion, but I don't think
he does not have a concussion.
Not anymore, at least.
No.
Maybe he did for like a day or something, because I heard that Mustafi, I doubted it the first time I heard that Mustafi really said he did have a concussion, but they don't last for like 2.5 weeks.
Yeah, I don't know.
Excuse me.
All right, well, I will deal with that.
Okay.
That's very concerning. I think you guys have to. I think you have to put a moratorium, like no videotaping of people.
Yeah.
I mean, first of all, that is in and of itself, it's like a form of bullying. I mean, and also then somebody send those videos out, and it's like it's a digital record.
Yeah.
Yeah, like this.
If his face is in that bully, is in that video, I mean, then that is just not right.
Yeah. I mean, face is in it too. So if it got released to whatever college he's going to, it's lit.
Not only that, his whole life is going to be affected.
Oh yeah.
In terms of employment, and not just that. I mean, horsing around is one thing.
Yeah.
But you guys have to step up and say, hey, guys, you understand what is. This is where you got to step up. So, you're a senior, and you've been here for a long time, and you've seen stuff that's been good-natured fun, and you've seen stuff that was not right, and you have to stand up and say no.
That's why we're bringing it up now, though. So.
All right, but I mean, I would also.
Yeah.
I mean, we'll talk to later. And,
No, it makes me feel so weird being.
Yeah, no, it's kind of uncomfortable.
Like he is such a gross individual. Like, I don't like that. Like, oh.
But I mean, I think think we have to stop and say, this is unacceptable.
Yeah, no,
Not
it's
just because
it's
if people just say, oh, well, he's bizarre, we're gonna walk around him, he's gotta deal with it.
Yeah.
You don't, granted. All right, well, that's really concerning to me.
because if he doesn't get called out, it turns into like
Actual
poop.
yeah.
And I'm like that'd be even worse.
All right. Okay, well, we're gonna meet today's Monday. We're gonna meet next Monday,
All three of us. Okay.
and I'm gonna get a report on all of you, how classes are going, homework, okay?
Mm-hmm.
As well as the dorm.
Okay.
All right?
Cool.
Thank you, gentlemen.
How are we gonna? Well, I guess we missed this class. So this comments on the report.
No, just go on you.
Oh, okay.
No.
Thank you.
It's a good thing that we have these recordings because these students were just trying to report an incident that made them feel really concerned and really uncomfortable. And instead of getting the support from the leaders of this school, instead they got shamed for even bringing it up in the first place. The fact that the kids felt the need to record and share this conversation is telling in and of itself. After further research into the school, I also learned that allegedly they market themselves internationally as a competitive American boarding school, not a behavioral program. It is literally bad news all around. And like I said, it's still in operation. I might need to do a deep dive just on this school because there is so much to uncover on its own. I mean, Reddit boards and websites are full of people speaking out about their terrible experiences at this school, trying to warn parents. There was even a flyer circulating around from Laura who was trying to sell like a workshop or teaching on how to parent adult children. It's just gross to me at this point. It's totally exploitative. Now, I was going to skip this one until I learned who the founder was. The Seed wasn't founded by someone with an educational or math background, just like all these other schools, or at least most of them. But he was still woefully unqualified to perform any kind of therapy on children. Because guess what he was? A stand up comedian. Yeah, you heard that right. In 1970, a stand up comedian created a drug rehab center with practices similar to Synanon. He played the same attack therapy game, except it would go on for 12 hours while the children were forced to sit in metal chairs while they were just berated. It's absolutely unthinkable. But luckily, this one was shut down after 4 years because an investigation was made and shocking discoveries were uncovered that some of the methods used at the Seed were similar to techniques used on prisoners of war in North Korea. But guess what? Shockingly, there were multiple spin offs of the Seed. These are people who had put their kids there. Like, imagine having all of this information. It's created by a stand up comedian who used the same tactics as North Korea's government and being like, ooh, you know what? I'm going to keep doing this. I think that this is going to work. We should just keep putting children through this trauma. Straight Inc. was created in 1976, but was luckily shut down in 1993 after having to settle $15 million in lawsuits. But then Kids Center of America was a spinoff of that. So it's all just so creepy and interconnected, and it illustrates the massive issue we have. An entire industry that is completely unregulated in this country, by the way, and not just unregulated, but some of these facilities are being given funding by the government and getting referred to parents by government entities. I mean, when will we start listening to these children? They are screaming their stories from the rooftops, and it just seems like no one is really listening. We shared some survivor testimonies in my last video, and because it's so important to hear directly from these victims, I want to share a few more today. And I want to remind you all that these might be really difficult to get through. So if you'd rather not hear these stories, I'm going to go ahead and give you the timestamp to just kind of jump to the conclusion and the WASP coverage here right now on the screen. At the high frontier, I experienced physical and emotional abuse. When I turned 18 and tried to leave the facility, staff tackled me and I broke my ankle. They then restrained me in a van and placed me into an isolation room with no bed, pillows, or any basic necessities for 5 days. Despite my parents being lied to by a therapist about the events, I was kept there against my will for an additional 4 months, not being able to walk for a month, and requested a doctor see me as I received no medical treatment whatsoever besides the group I was with having to have 2 residents help me walk instead of simply giving me crutches. I was not at this facility for any legal issues, nor was I a danger to myself or others. As a survivor of this traumatic experience, I want to share my story, report this incident, and help in any way possible to prevent similar incidents from happening in the future. I appreciate beyond belief to find out that there are whistleblowers sounding the alarm on a problem I thought was isolated and rarely happened, like what happened to me. And now we're seeing that it truly is not isolated and it isn't something that is rare. It's actually far more common than we believed, at least from what I've been learning. It's way more common than I would have ever anticipated. This is a story from Sable Hector Garza Residential Treatment Center testimony. Hector Garza Center is a residential treatment facility in San Antonio, Texas, that I was placed at twice in the span of a few years while in CPS custody. That's what I mean by government organizations are sending children here. It's so heartbreaking. I was placed in this and bounced between here and several other Texas facilities for 7 years of my adolescence. I was placed here due to being, I'll let you read that on the screen, and self harming at age 11 after losing my mother to the same thing, and my father was imprisoned. My brother and I were separated, and he went to a foster home where I was put in these lockdown facilities where I was horrifically abused for the crime of being depressed and wanting to unalive myself. I was told these facilities were therapeutic at the beginning and were supposed to help me with my trauma. Little did I realize the trauma about to be inflicted on me was much worse than the loss of my family. Within my first couple of weeks, I came to understand that this was not therapy. It was prison, and the staff had free rein to do whatever they wanted to me and the other girls there. I was a strong spirited young girl and decided it was my duty to fight back against what they were doing and protect the other girls as best I could, and I did absolutely try my best. This quickly led me to being on a constant restriction, not being allowed to eat for weeks at a time, and barely having any water, being locked in a completely bare, concrete isolation room for almost months at a time, being physically beaten by staff, injected with tranquilizers against my will, and being force fed about 17 different psychiatric medications that made me feel constantly ill, and receiving no medical attention or any injuries sustained. I was on constant unalive watch, which meant I usually didn't get much sleep due to having to sleep in a hallway right next to a staff member under bright fluorescent lights with no blanket or pillows or sheets on a bare cot on the floor. The over medication, sleep deprivation, starvation, and forced intense physical workouts had weakened me enough that I was no longer able to fight back as before, making it that much easier for the male staff that were assigned to watch me shower and use the restroom due to unalive watch and sexually assault me on almost a daily basis. This is one of the worst stories I've read. This is hard to get through. There were many girls who became pregnant by these staff members as well, but due to the miscarriage was guaranteed and it was swept under the rug as everything else was. Many of us tried to run with little success. A few girls did manage to get away, and we all were incredibly happy for them and incredibly jealous. The culture amongst us girls was akin to that of a woman's prison. Many of us looked out for each other, exchanged contraband, and became friends. But as these things were forbidden, they would often separate anyone that got close to each other. And fighting and drama amongst us was encouraged by staff, of course, because they don't want you to have an ally in these places. Many of us were in CPS custody. That's just despicable. And some girls were placed due to juvenile probation, but there was no separation from those placed on criminal charges and those placed due to mental health. Wow. Many of the girls who had never done drugs or committed crimes were introduced to these things through this and came out of the program worse off than when they came in. These places are, I'm getting so angry. It's just disgusting. There were many unalivings that took place, and some girls passed in there due to medical neglect or outright abuse. And because many of us were wards of the state, this also was covered up and swept under the rug. We weren't allowed any contact with the outside world at all, not even allowed phone calls, and we were trapped behind 10 feet high wire fences lined with barbed wire. Hector Garza, New Life Children's Center, Krause Center, and multiple others here in Texas were all the same. And the only reprieve we could access were the psychiatric hospitals we'd be placed at between treatment centers while our caseworkers found the next center to put us in. This was between 2012 and 2016. It honestly was not that long ago. To say the psych ward was almost like a vacation is an absurd thing for a child to go through. Many of the girls I was in centers with after having gotten out took their own life due to the trauma of it, or have ended up struggling in life with addictions, homelessness, and various other unfortunate circumstances, often needing extensive therapy and support to overcome what we endured in these facilities. I myself have struggled with finding my footing in life, but I am surprisingly doing well compared to my peers that were there with me, all things considered. I am still homeless, have never had an opportunity to learn to drive, have struggled with employment, and have severe mental health issues and trauma from my time in the centers. God, this is heartbreaking. I've struggled in relationships due to how my trauma presents at times, and it's difficult to find people that understand this trauma that haven't seen it for themselves. And it's very difficult to explain to them as they will never experience what I and many other young girls did. It was essentially legal child as we were all basically being sexually exploited and exploited for forced labor, such as cleaning the facilities, forced animal cleanup, and being forced to volunteer at labor warehouses. Wow. Which, and this is a total speculation on my part, but just from what I know with Synanon, the wages that they're probably getting from like they're volunteering at a labor warehouse, but their wages are being given to the institution. So, like within Synanon, these people who are basically in rehab and it's like work release rehab, they're not making money, or at least not all of the money from going to their day labor job. The place they're working at is actually paying Synanon. So it would not surprise me if this labor warehouse was paying this facility to bring these children in to work for basically like super, super cheap. I hope to one day be able to share my story with many more people than I have, and I think this is my first step to that. I hope one day I can be a catalyst for getting all of these facilities shut down, as I did with Hector Garza. Good for you. Hector Garza is no longer in operation due to myself and a few other girls finally reporting all of this to CPS and DCFS in my state. But all of the other similar facilities are still in operation to this day, and I hope to be able to bring these monsters down and expose them for what they really are. Thank you for hearing my story, and I hope we as a collective can bring these abuses to light and put an end to the troubled teen industry for profit, for good. Me too. This will be the last testimony I share today from Silvers Woodridge of the Ozarks. Within the first week or two of entering the program, I was attacked brutally and had an attempted murder by a patient, completely uninstigated. The patient had managed to obtain a butcher knife due to events going on that day and threw it at me. The knife had been left in the med room, which had been left open several times during my stay, which led to at least 5 separate incidents. The knife was brought into the hospital for an event where the staff were cutting up fruit for us, and we learned a bit about nutrition. After this incident, no law enforcement was alerted. The incident was written down and told to my parents as it was being a smaller butter knife, and she was still in the facility. The next day, she ended up brutally attacking me, stating that she was going to kill me. Only then was law enforcement alerted and she was sent to a juvenile center. The utter lack of concern of separating people with like a criminal history who might need one kind of help versus children whose parents have sent them there for behavioral help is one of the most shocking things I think I'm seeing throughout my research, because it just goes to show the negligence, the lack of care, because those two kids are going to need completely different kind of help and therapy. It's shocking. And then let's say your kid is there for behavioral issues and is suddenly like exposed to this concerning, you know, criminal activity, or it's like we heard in the previous story, it's just going to end up being worse for the child. All of the evidence is pointing to these places being so terrible and problematic. Another day, a resident was able to sneak a pair of scissors from the classroom and use it to injure herself so severely that she required stitches. That same resident also did this to cut her hair on a previous occasion. One time, a patient had been permitted to be alone for at least 30 minutes with a glass perfume bottle, and she used it to hurt herself. In the yard, there were many pieces of broken glass and possibly other sharp things that were traded around. It took a very long time to deal with, and I personally had to help clean up the glass because no one else would. There was another incident where at least 2 patients had been left around the open med room. They grabbed several used STD testing needles and were able to harm themselves with them. Another incident with 2 of the same patients led them to being able to overdose on various medications they had grabbed from the same med room. Only after this incident was anyone fired, although as far as I know, nothing else was done. One day I was left in a bathroom that was locked from the outside despite trying to call that I wasn't in there. I was in there for around 30 minutes. I know because of the breakfast schedule, until I figured out how to get out as I was able to unlock it from the inside. The staff involved was fired, but to my knowledge, nothing else happened over it. I will note that basically the first 2 incidents, the incident with the 2 patients in the med room, I am unsure as the order of these events, but overall there was a major lack of supervision, neglect that occurred during my stay, and a lot of covering up of incidents. Again, these stories are so important because it's difficult to get a true idea and understanding of what's going on inside these places from just reading stuff on the internet or researching. I mean, there have been a lot of investigations done by journalists. One excerpt I read was actually from a thesis project that a PhD applicant was writing in the 1950s about a wilderness camp. And it just goes to show that people have been investigating this for decades. When are we going to start taking it seriously? At what point do we say this has to stop? This has been going on for 100 years, over 100 years. It's just it's too long, way too long for this to still be an unregulated industry. It's absolutely terrible. It definitely makes you want to do more. And don't worry, at the end of this video, I'm going to be sharing a little bit about what we can do, what's being done, and share some resources in that pinned comment down below. The longer I talk about this, the less believable it is to me. When I first decided to cover this topic, I truly had no idea how deep these cuts were. And honestly, I am just scratching the surface. There are hundreds of programs like this all over the country, and even more all over the globe. And honestly, I might just make this a recurring series on my channel because there is just so much more to be shared and exposed about these dangerous institutions. And there are so many stories to be shared. So let me know in the comments if you would be interested in me featuring different schools and telling some of these stories because I believe that the more we talk about these things, the more can be done to stop them. And I implore any parent who is worried about their child to please avoid sending them somewhere like this, literally at all costs. It's a dangerous, dangerous place for your child. So finally, we get to possibly the best known organization within the industry, WASP, or Worldwide Association of Programs and Schools. Sounds just vague enough to be legitimate, but don't let that fool you. It is just another troubled teen institution. Now, it was created by three people who used to work at another school. They worked at the Provo school. So they definitely saw the financial potential of this industry. WASP is the organization that was featured in the Netflix docu-series The Program. However, it has undergone a lot of trouble with the law and has been dissolved. Although we should make sure to never forget the name Robert Lichfield, the creator of this entity. All but one school has been shut down. There is unfortunately one still in operation in Mexico called Sunset Bay Academy. Now, like a lot of leaders of these organizations and of cults, Robert and his brother Narvin, who was also heavily involved at the time, both claimed that they didn't know what was going on at certain schools because they might not have traveled to all of them. But the fact of the matter is, if something is happening at your business, within your organization, and you're the one running it, you're the one profiting from it, it becomes your responsibility. It's your fault, and you need to take accountability because you were not protecting those kids. But no, Robert Lichfield is just happy sitting on his millions-dollar estate, doesn't really care at all about the children suffered within his institutions. The more I look at the common themes in these groups, I see mostly men taking advantage of young children and even children with a learning disability or victims of disastrous trauma like it seems they either see it as a money grab or as a way to indulge in their disgusting and abusive impulses. Anytime someone exploits mental health care or addiction and says they're just going to help people just so they can profit or abuse people or both, I feel like there's a special place in hell waiting for that person because it is deplorable. And that word isn't even strong enough to describe these types of people. They literally need to be put away, and they should be absolutely ashamed of themselves. What's also extremely troubling to me is that it seems like predators recognize that these are places where they're safe, they're protected, where they will have access to vulnerable and innocent children, where there's little to no authority and there's definitely no regulation even within the institution. These places seem to attract people who want to harm children and who enjoy it. And then on top of that, they get a paycheck. It's disgusting. And laws need to be changed. And they are changing. Many states are taking steps to regulate the industry, and I know that it is an issue that has been brought to Congress. But the industry is just so vast. It's way bigger than even I thought it was because I hadn't heard about a wilderness camp until maybe 2 or 3 years ago when a creator that I have been watching for years, her name is Cece Suarez, she had talked about it when Paris Hilton, or after I should say, Paris Hilton first started kind of talking about it more publicly. It's just so secretive and it's swept under the rug. And it's difficult for people to come out publicly and share their experiences. I mean, for example, Robert Lichfield still has a lot of money and influence. I mean, there's no way we would be able to take these down one by one. And I'm sure that survivors are nervous to speak out publicly. So the only real solution is regulation or just banning these institutions on a federal level. And luckily, there are organizations wanting to do just that. So if you're interested, you can get involved. I'm going to share some websites so that you can look at them if you're curious about getting more information or volunteering, or even get involved in the political movement that is working really hard to regulate these industries. It's all going to be in that pinned comment down below. So, wow, that was a lot. There was just so much to cover. I mean, let me know if you want to hear more survivor stories, because I'd love to start a series talking about survivor stories and when it comes to these institutions, when it comes to cults, when it comes to even like true crime stories like Close Calls, where I mean, I've heard some crazy stories of people recently who survived a killer. So I would love to just share stories like that to create more awareness of what are the tactics that are being used. How can you talk to your parent who wants to potentially send you to a place like this, and what resources can you provide your parent to say, I can't go here. I'm really afraid to do this. Please look into it more. How can we protect more people? How can we protect more people from cults? And the best way to do that is awareness. And I think that some of the best ways to really create that awareness is hearing your story and sharing your story, because I just think it makes people see that it could happen to them, and it creates more empathy among us, which is what we really, really need when it comes to these types of organizations and these dangerous groups and dangerous people. So please email me your story at letfresherin@gmail.com if you would like me to share your story anonymously on the channel. I want to say thank you all so much for watching today's video. I know that it is a lot to unpack, but I think that with a topic as huge as this one, like I said, the best thing we can do is create more awareness. So let me know in the comments down below if you'd like to hear more deep dives on these schools, and share those survivor testimonials. Thank you so much for watching, commenting, liking, sharing this video. That will help create more awareness as videos like this can spread. I would love for when people search up these organizations, they just start seeing critical videos and hearing testimonials and stories. Because when you Google a lot of these schools, you just get their website, and their websites are always going to leave out the full story. And hopefully, seeing videos like this and hearing stories will dissuade parents from sending their children to these dangerous places, and also protect people from cults and cult like groups. Thank you all again so much for joining me today. Please stay safe out there, and remember, stay skeptical. Until next time, bye.